It is 6 o'clock, and you know what that means. It is time for Brian Williams to teach us all about real estate investing. This is your host, Jimmy O.
Jimmy this O. B-Town. What's up?
What's up, B-Town? Oh, man. I am James Orr. I am joined tonight by Brian Williams. And Brian is going to be teaching us some amazing stuff tonight. Topic to be determined.
Not teaching anything tonight other than COVID update.
Nice. And there's a lot to update us on according to COVID.
Yeah, no doubt.
So tonight's class is going to be pretty amazing, actually. I'm pretty excited. So this is the mini class. And in fact, this is one of the few classes I've reached out to you to ask for, at least to show you something before I taught it. I sent you a chart. I said, hey, what do you think? And you're like, this is amazing. So
that's not what I said. I said, that's really cool.
Oh, okay. That was more the tone. I read it as this is amazing.
Yeah, so. But I was like, I try not to ever use the word amazing because you've overused it.
What? That is not possible. Yeah. You can't overuse amazing.
You can.
I don't know if that's true. All right. So the cash flow power meter, that's what I'm doing tonight. And here are the upcoming classes. Next week, I am doing Q3 2020 Northern Colorado real estate market stats. For those that are in Northern Colorado or that are interested in investing in the Northern Colorado market, I'm going to be doing an entire class on market stats. For those of you that have attended previous market stats classes with me before, this is completely different. I did not make the slide deck. So these are not my market stats slides. These are more traditional market stats slides from the Your Castle brokerage. So you'll see a whole bunch of market stats. It's going to be amazing, but it's not, if you're like coming thinking you're going to go see what I normally do, it's going to be different. So prepare yourself. That's going to be Wednesday, November 4th. If the world is still around on that date, we shall see. So class after that, November 11th, we're going to be doing the ultimate guide to VA financing because November 11th happens to be Veterans Day. Thank you for your service. And so we're going to be going over how to get nothing down VA, Veterans Administration, loans in order to buy properties, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, single family homes, any of those with nothing down financing. So we'll go and do a deep dive, the ultimate guide to VA financing on November 11th for Veterans Day. You're welcome. Then after that, a class that I still don't know what I'm teaching, but I'm pretty sure is going to be amazing. And that is the ultimate guide to market corrections. And so I'm going to go over a whole bunch of stuff about probably stock market and real estate market corrections and how to correctly model those and how to think about them and how to prepare your real estate portfolio for market corrections. So I'm going to take all the stuff I've been thinking about market corrections and how to do modeling and how to do all that stuff. And we're going to put it all into one 2-hour class. You'll notice that doesn't say mini class because it's probably not going to be a mini class. It's probably going to be a full class.
How is tonight a mini class?
I only have 39 slides.
Wow, that's like a full 2 hours.
It is not 2 hours, especially when you see some of them. They're like a chart. And so it's going to be amazing, but
charts.
And then Thanksgiving, I got bad news last night. I found out that my mother is not coming out to visit me for Thanksgiving. That COVID is not nice. So we decided that for safety reasons, my 75-year-old mother is not going to come out and visit for Thanksgiving. So there's that. Now we got to see what we're doing for Thanksgiving. Hey, Brian, if I'm not doing anything for Thanksgiving, do you have any ideas what I should do?
No.
I should just hang out by myself in my house by myself. No,
dude, I already invited you for freaking crying out loud. So the no was an appropriate answer because, if you don't remember me inviting you literally right after your mom canceled, I can't help you.
Oh, man. So I can come over to your house if I want to for Thanksgiving?
Yeah, if you're not sick.
Well, how am I going to know if I'm sick?
Get a test.
Yeah, I guess I could do that. Do you know if the test show? We'll ask this later. All right, so Thanksgiving, there's no class. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we're not teaching any classes. I'll be trying to figure out if I'm going over Brian's or doing something else or whatever it is. And Brian will be cooking turkey or whatever he does for Thanksgiving. So there's no class there. And then are they even on tonight? They are on tonight. So by special request, one of our clients said to me, hey, can you please put Nomad by Proxy on the schedule? And I've been pushing it off. I've been like, yeah, I need to write that class eventually at some point. No big rush. I'll get to it eventually at some point in the future. And they're like, we really, really want Nomad by Proxy. And so due to popular demand, at least one person. We are teaching Nomad by proxy, which is basically how to do Nomad without moving into properties by using someone else as your proxy to be the owner occupant when you do it. So think of having your kids buy properties when they go to college, or having your parents move close to you to be near their grandkids and them moving into properties and then you converting them to rentals. It's stuff like that. All the things you want to do so that you don't have to move into properties as a nomad. And it is going to be amazing. I've already started thinking about what's going to be in it, and that will be pretty awesome stuff. And Brian, what if people don't like the classes we've got scheduled?
Don't come.
Don't come to class.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not what I was thinking.
If you don't like what we're teaching, don't come. I mean, what else is there? I mean, you know what else you could do? You could go to this website and type some funny things in, and then we'll teach those.
I got to clean that up if you do type in funny things, so please don't.
Yeah, there you go. James has to do work if you type funny things in. Type some funny things in, people. Go, go, go.
Oh, my gosh. If you go to realestatefinancialplanner.com/suggest, you can suggest classes you'd like to see us teach. And realize at this point, I've been doing classes since 2003.
Since 20, just 20, the year 20. You've been doing it for 2,000 years now.
17 plus years or so. And so at this point, I think we've taught everything except Nomad by proxy, apparently. Actually, some of these classes I'm teaching are brand new, like the deep dive into VA financing stuff.
Right.
No, we've kind of taught that before.
I think you should make a new URL for this every week. And it should be like this week it's suggest, next week it's demand, next week it's something else. Like just awesome redirect.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So introductions by chat. We are doing this live. It is 7:04 p.m. on Tuesday, the 34th of January.
It is not 7:04, dude. 6:04.
It is 6:07 on the 28th of October, 2020. So if you are wanting to do this live, please do put out a text or email or use the chat window.
What James is trying to say is introduce yourself via chat. Don't forget to turn it to all panelists and attendees. Tell us who you are and where you're from. And then the question of the night is, how do you define cash flow? I define it by all of James's cash flows directly to me.
Yeah, so if you guys want to define cash flow, it's going to be relevant for our discussion tonight. And then, of course, if you do have questions, please do use the chat window. And please make sure you do all panelists and attendees. And we haven't added it to here, but if you advertise your business or kind of like do inappropriate things, you will be banned. So just kind of a warning for people. Haven't had to ban people for 2 weeks. Although 3 weeks ago we banned somebody. There's a podcast, and I put up 5 new episodes of classes to the podcast. 5 or 4? Was it 5?
I don't know. I'm just modeling whatever you say.
Okay, so it's like 5 or 4 different new episodes to the podcast this morning. So there's additional content up there. It is the real estate investor story time stuff. So if you go to realestatefinancialplanner.com/podcast, you can check all that out. And I probably will add the rest of them. I have like a certain allotment of the amount of stuff I can upload each month. And so it'll probably roll into the next month before I upload the rest of them. All right, now I get to take a break. I'll be back in an hour.
Excellent. And then we'll see if you can actually fit your mini class into an hour. Yeah, you can go to the next slide because this is the COVID update. Hey, look, remember September 13th when James was like, hey, Brian, the numbers are going down. And I was like, but they're going to go up. Hey, look at that. Congratulations. We did it. We beat COVID. There it is right there on the chart. I don't know if you knew that, but it's over. It's not over. That's the sad part. We actually hit the highest several days totals that we've had so far since the beginning of the pandemic, which is super unfortunate. And honestly, the next 6 to 12 weeks are probably going to be not much better. So that kind of sucks. Please be safe, be human beings. There's lots of stuff going on in the real estate world related to rent and late payments and can't evict. And this is a pretty crazy situation. But this curve, I don't know if you can see the slope of this line as it is basically becoming like straight up. It's not good. So Put your masks on and be safe. Next slide.
No, I just realized something. I always feel like really depressed at the beginning of NCRE classes, and I was wondering what was going on. And then I realized, yeah, of course, because we have COVID update at the beginning. It's like, let's bring everyone down before we go teach them this amazing stuff with this cash flow power meter. Let's see if we can depress.
That's why there's like, 20 people who wait till 6:15 to jump on. They're like, oh, that crap is done. Don't have to feel bad. So I don't know if you remember the previous 2 weeks charts, but they didn't look this bad. So if you want to feel worse, like, although I will say North Dakota is not in first place anymore. South Dakota managed to pass them this week.
Oh, nice.
So, I mean, these numbers are insane. If you look at those curves are not good. Like we were like this, and now we're like this. This is not where we want to be. Not good. This sucks. Next slide.
I don't even see us on here.
Yeah, I only took the like worst 15 or 18 states.
Oh, so we didn't make the worst 15 or 18.
No, I think we're on the next line though. We're like right in the middle.
Okay.
But yeah, delinquency updates. This is dollars from the property manager. 4.45%. Basically, October 13th through the end of the month, we're pretty much flat in terms of getting more dollars. Somehow it went back up from October 21st. My guess is that somebody moved in and didn't pay or had a rent payment due date on a weird day of the month that they just took over a property. So that is that one. You can go to the next slide, sir. And then delinquency update for units. So we did drop a little bit. This is the percentage of units that actually owe some rent. Doesn't mean they owe all their rent, obviously. 6.8%. So we're down 0.2, but it is, you'll notice we are ending significantly higher, in my opinion, in October than we were in September, August, July, and June, and May for that matter, and April and March and every other month since the beginning of time. So, 6.8% October. What are November and December going to look like? It's going to probably be about the same. So, this is why you need reserves. Vacancy rate at the bottom, it's down a little bit, so they're still getting stuff rented, which is great. 2.86% and 2.1. The property manager did note that they were having an increase in subleases lately, which is also interesting. I know I have 2 of them going on, and one of them was almost very immediately applied for and filled, and the other one was not. So, be it what it is, it's just part of the business, but realize that you may have some people like, hey, we're not going to live here. We're going back to home, wherever that is, and we're going to live with our family to save money because we don't have a job anymore, yada, yada, yada. Who knows what the reason is, but this is what's going on. So,
well, I thought about moving in with you so that we could be like one group and actually have some interaction with people. So maybe it's something like that happening too.
Yeah, could be.
Could be something
that
like
way, you take 2 groups and everybody gets sick.
Well, the thinking is that if you're in like a bubble or like your small group there, then at least you can have interactions with those people.
Yes. Yes. My bubble, I think, is much smaller than your bubble.
We're going to talk about this offline because it's highly deceptive how you just described that, because I think part of your bubble is extremely high risk and part of your bubble is not.
Sure.
So, well, we can talk about that offline though. Anyway, so let's shake off the all the bad news and stuff like that. Close your eyes, visualize puppies for 5 minutes frolicking in the sunny green grass on the park, and imagine for a minute, the Publishers Clearinghouse guy comes up to you and says, here's $1 gazillion. You no longer need to work. You can buy as many investment properties. You have unlimited funds to do that, and all of them cash flow because they're all free and clear. And now you feel pretty amazing. So now let's go into cash flow power meter now that we're not thinking about crazy COVID stuff anymore. So what is the cash flow power meter, and why should I even care?
Yeah. Why do I care?
Why do you care, Brian? You do
Currently,
care a lot.
I'm not sure I care. So make me care, James.
I will make you care. I'm going to force it on you. Oh, man. Okay, so the cash flow power meter, it measures the power of your cash flow on a property.
Every time you say I just want everyone that's watching, just like if you were there for the fire presentation, every time he says cash flow power meter, I want you all at home to go, power. We won't be able to hear you, but
put it in
I
the
will
chat
know
window.
you're doing it. And if Joe is on here, I know Joe's doing it. So,
oh, look at this. Everyone's gonna start typing power. It's gonna just flood the comment section with power. Oh, that's pretty awesome. Okay, so here's how this actually came about. It was earlier this year. I don't know if the client that I was showing him the house is on. I don't see him on right now. But anyway, I was about to go meet a client to show a house at the very beginning part of COVID. And in the car on the way over, I was starting to think about like how I think about cash flow. And one of the things that came up when I thought about cash flow was when I actually analyze a deal, the first thing I do is I say, okay, does this thing have positive cash flow fully managed? And that's sort of like the first question I ask myself. And a lot of times, especially in our marketplace, if you do put any reasonable amount down, 20 or 25%, the chance of it having positive cash flow with full management in place and full regular numbers in place is actually pretty low. And so most of the time, my next question after that is, well, does it at least have positive cash flow if I were to manage it myself? Not that I'm going to have myself manage it, but if I go ahead and manage it myself, does it have positive cash flow? And I think about it that way. Then the next thing I do, I said, okay, well, if it doesn't have positive cash flow, if I'm managing it myself, does it at least have positive cash flow if we take into account the tax benefits of depreciation when we think about the money we're getting from depreciating the property times our effective tax rate? We take that extra money that we have and we call it cash flow from depreciation. And when we take that in there, does it at least have positive cash flow if we did that? And so that's usually the three questions I've historically asked myself whenever I analyze a deal or whenever I look at a deal for a client or something like that. So usually those are the three questions. And then Andrew, who kind of has been coming to classes, brought up another interesting point. And so I added this additional one to it, which was this idea that would it have positive cash flow if we had gotten interest-only loan on the property? And so that became like this new fourth, what I would consider to be a much lower importance question, but still a good question to know if this property is going to have at least cash flow when you take into account an interest-only type loan. And I went and I told Brian about this, and I hadn't separated out the property management, non-property management one in my head yet. And I was kind of explaining this to Brian, like I was drawing it and I was explaining it to him while I was waiting for this client to show up at the house. And this is what goes on when I'm waiting for you at properties. You know, Brian will call me and we'll have like a 10-minute conversation while I'm doing this. And so Brian and I are talking about this, and Brian says, you should separate out the colors when you, because I was telling him about the color things coming. You'll see that in a second here. But I was telling him about the colors of making it green if it has positive cash flow. And he said, +1. I actually said +1, but he basically said you should separate out the colors for if it's got positive cash flow with property management or positive cash flow if you're managing yourself. So Brian actually came up with part of this idea, whether he knew about it or not. But I said, yeah, that's a really good idea. I should do that. And so that's the +1 from Brian when we kind of came up with this. So what it does, it allows us to visualize very quickly how good a property cash flows, or in a lot of cases, how bad is the property going to cash flow? And is it like really, really bad? Like we should ignore this property and not buy it, or we should sell it, or we should refinance it or something like that? Or is this property good enough? And if we look at it over time, it's going to get better based on some reasonable expectations. So it's sort of like a really easy way to see this. And I'm going to show you some examples where we show you just like a chart of cash flow and then a chart of the cash flow power meter. And I think you're going to see the extreme difference in how much information you can glean just by looking at one chart versus the other. And it's going to be pretty amazing. Yeah. Did we do power? Is that what we did?
Yep.
Okay. So really it's another way, if you think about it, and I'll show you this in detail here in a second, it's another way of looking at the return on investment quadrant that we talk about, except it doesn't do all four of them. So for those of you that came to our class, especially the class recently where we did everything you learned about deal analysis is wrong, which was pretty amazing actually. The class there, we talked about the 4 different areas of return you get when you are investing in real estate. So there's appreciation, the tendency for property values to increase over time. There's cash flow, the gross income you have on the property minus all of your expenses, including vacancy and maintenance and taxes and insurance and all your loan and all that other stuff. So cash flow is like what you have from there. Tax benefits, which we define as the depreciation benefit times whatever your tax rate is. So how much cash flow you're getting from depreciation. And then debt pay down, how much of the loan you're paying down each month if you have a loan. And then we sum all of those up and we have the middle. Well, what the cash flow power meter does, go ahead and type in power in the window if you're going to do that. What the cash flow power meter does is it ignores appreciation because that's really not part of cash flow. But these 3 are in some ways related to your cash flow, how much cash flow you get in a property. And so we take into account cash flow, tax benefits, and that debt pay down portion. Okay. Really, what is going on when we chart the cash flow parameter, like on a chart and look at it, is we're really plotting rent. And once we plot rent, in addition to rent as kind of like an underlay, something that is showing up behind where the rent is appearing, I show you where the different sections are for, are you in the positive cash flow section with property management, or are you in the positive cash flow section where you're managing yourself, or are you in the positive cash flow section if you take into account the tax benefits from depreciation, or are you in the positive cash flow section, it's really negative, but are you in that section if you had debt pay down? And then are you like really, really negative where you really don't get any benefit from owning this property, you're just feeding it, okay? And so it really shows you how much cash flow you have. And so for those of you that have seen, because this has showed up in a few classes since we came up with it, have you seen this version of it before? You're probably familiar with it. And I did go, it's probably as good a time as any. I did go and change the colors a little bit to match the actual return on investment quadrant, because before I had an orange color in here, which we really don't use anywhere, and I replaced that with the red that it was supposed to be, and then I added a gray color here as well. Okay, so let's go over what this actually means, because it's important for you to realize what the different sections are so that you understand and can see where we are with this particular property. So this little gray area, for some of you may not even be able to see because it's really light gray and it sort of merges in with the background white. That area right there means severe negative cash flow. It means rent does not even cover the interest payments on the loan, plus all the other expenses like taxes and insurance and stuff like that. So that's the area where you really aren't getting any of the three areas of the cash flow, the return on investment quadrant at all. Okay, so that's the area that's really bad. If your rent was over there, then that would be bad. This next area shows you the area where you have negative cash flow. It's the area that represents how much debt you're paying down on the loan as a function of the rent. So how much of the rent you're collecting is actually going to paying down on the loan each month. And you would have positive cash flow if you had gotten an interest-only loan. So for Andrew and anyone else who's investing is getting interest-only loans, this is the area where the interest, the principal part of the payment is coming from. So if you've gotten an interest-only loan, this is the part that you're getting the benefit from debt pay down on the property. This next area is positive cash flow, but it's only positive cash flow if you count the cash flow from depreciation benefit. And that's why it's yellow. The yellow section is for cash flow from depreciation. And so it shows you, hey, listen, if you're getting this amount in rent, then you're actually positive cash flow if you take into account your cash flow from depreciation. The next section shows you.
Hang on.
Yes.
We have a question on the first two.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So for these sections, are you assuming the same interest rate for interest only as you are with amortized, or are
Yes.
you personalizing it by different rates?
Nope. The interest rate is the same for this particular parameter. I do something funky with property management, which I'll talk about later, but the interest rate, I assume that they're the same, even though, Andrew, I realized that they could be different. Is he the one I brought that up?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So interest rate could be different on those. In this case, they're the same. Okay, because we're really, it's not that you're getting an interest only loan. It's sort of like you're imagining the interest only portion of the loan is sort of like divided. We're dividing out what's the interest portion and then what's the principal portion of it. That's a good question though. Okay. The next area, the light green area, is you have positive cash flow, but only if you manage it yourself. So this assumes you have 0 for property management in there. And then finally, the last area says you have positive cash flow even with professional property management in place. And that's the dark green area. And then finally, this thick, dark black line is the rent you're getting for the property. And it shows you where this particular property now falls on your meter. Okay. So the black line shows you where this property is. And so you can see at a glance that this property is in the positive cash flow with professional property management. And it's relatively close to that line so that if you had a small decrease in rent, you actually would not be positive. So it shows you like a relative size as to how close you are to this property not being in the positive cash flow range with your property manager. But you could also see it's a pretty good distance before you get to the point where you have to take into account cash flow from depreciation to be positive. Is there another question?
Yep. So Kimberly asked, what's the definition of an interest-only loan? Is this 0% down or 20% down, but not paying down principal? Yeah, it doesn't matter what percent you actually put down. An interest-only loan is just one where the principal's not amortized over time. So you're literally, if you took a $200,000 loan, your loan at the end of the interest-only loan is still, you have to pay $200,000 and you're paying only the interest on that $200,000.
Yeah. And you're going to see here in a second, I think it's one of the slides coming up, the actual power meter, it's not a generic power meter. It's not like you can say, oh, it always looks like this with every property. It actually gets calculated for every property and it looks different for every property. For example, if you have a higher interest loan, the amount for the interest only portion is going to be larger. If you have a higher interest rate loan, then the amount you're paying down in debt on the property, your principal only portion of it, is actually smaller at the beginning. If you have a property that costs a lot more, or there's no value of the land or something like that, your cash flow from depreciation section will be larger, and so on. So the meter itself and the color bands actually is unique for each property. It changes depending on what your property situation is.
And the length of the different sections of the power meter are determined by dollars, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
They are dollars, because this is a chart. Yeah, this chart is showing you rent essentially. So it is a dollars amount that you have, and like right on the cusp is where it's break even for one section to the other, and the other one is break even here for this to that, and break even here. So you almost do the calculations as to where it would be break even for that to have happened, and then we just plot what that is and we color it in to show where they are. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, the colors match, and I went out of my way to change this. Before it wasn't, I had orange in there, and I said, for the sake of making sure everything was the same, I went ahead and matched the colors. So the green area is your cash flow section. The yellow area is your tax benefits, your cash flow from depreciation, and the red area is how much debt pay down you have. You'll notice there's no blue area because there's no appreciation on this chart at all. And I did the gray area to show you that that's something else. It is basically all the expenses on your property. It's not really included on the meter, but I wanted to show you the area that's there. Okay. All right. So as I've been saying, the meter is unique to each property. It's not like you can make this generic thing and just plot rent on it. We actually have to do a whole bunch of calculations to determine the size of each of those colored areas. And then we need to plot rent on it to show where you are on that particular property to see it. And I'm going to show you charts where we do this over time. And you're going to see that it actually varies over time as well for the property. And you'll see why it's calculated by each property, because there's a curve to different things. Okay. So as I said here, in other words, the color bands change depending on the characteristics of the property you're analyzing. More than just the dark black rent line vary. It's not just like that thing moves back and forth. It's like the actual color bands can move over time on your property. Changes based on changes in your cash flow assumptions, including financing on the property, your rents, any vacancy, property management, and your tax rate for that cash flow from depreciation calculation. Those will all impact the size of the bands. They'll change for you. Okay. So as one example, changing the interest rate will impact both your mortgage payment amount and how much debt pay down you're getting from that particular loan. And if you have the property free and clear where you don't have a mortgage on it, it won't even have debt pay down on there at all. That section will disappear. Okay. So here's some examples. What I mean by that. So these are all different properties. Many of them properties that I own. And so I'm just going to show you like where the thing shows up on these different properties. So for example, this property, we can clearly see that this property has a loan because it has a red section. And that if I were to manage it myself, it would have pretty decent positive cash flow. It doesn't have enough cash flow where if I have it professionally property managed, it would have positive cash flow. Okay. Here's another one. It has a loan. You can see the red section, and I haven't gotten past my depreciation. But this one shows that if we have it professionally property managed, it has positive cash flow. But it's relatively close to the line, such that if something happened, I had an additional expense, or I ended up not getting as much rent the next year on a lease renewal, that it actually might be negative from there. Here's another one. I have positive cash flow self-managing it. Here's one. It's probably a nomad property where I bought the property and it's not even positive cash flow if I manage it myself. It only has positive cash flow if I take into account the tax benefits of cash flow from depreciation. And you can see the rent is in that yellow area showing that that's where that is. Same with this one. In fact, I think this is the same property. I think I accidentally clicked in there twice. Okay. Here's another one showing it's positive cash flow with property management. with self-managed. This one is also really high cash flow, self-managed, almost enough to be positive cash flow if I had a professional property manager. And then here's a unique different one. This is a free and clear property, and it shows you that there's no loan on it, and that I have a wide area here where it's positive cash flow even with professional property manager. What this means is I could actually have my rent go down a lot before I would get to the point where it wasn't positive even with professional property manager. In fact, this little green area here is the only area that would be if I actually managed it myself. And then there's all this section here for the cash flow from depreciation. So you can see that this shows you a sign of resilience, okay? It can visually demonstrate to you how much rent can drop before you get to the next area of the meter. So it shows you like how sure you are of getting cash flow in that particular area. And when you go into the next area, what that happens. So for example, the free and clear property that I just showed you, this has really strong positive cash flow where rent could go down a lot before I didn't have positive cash flow. Whereas this other one where I don't quite have as much and I have a loan on it, even just a tiny drop in rent means I'm probably not positive with professional property management. I'd only be positive if I managed it myself. Does that make sense? I think you're muted.
I just shook my head yes.
Oh, okay. That was.
But I do have a question before you go on.
Okay.
So, well, I did. It's not my question.
Okay.
Does the meter include the return on the reserves and like all the reserve stuff you taught a few weeks ago in the most amazing class ever when we all learned that we've done everything wrong our entire lives?
It doesn't, because this is not charting that. It's charting rent.
Right.
So the only thing it's really charting is the rent on the property. And then it's calculating out what your cash flow would be, not including the reserves part of it, because it's not a return on investment calculation or a return on equity calculation that we're doing. This is almost like a return in dollars sort of calculation that it's charting.
And then next question is, so looking at the match slide, I'm not sure, it was probably back a few slides. Yes, the color match probably.
Yeah.
Can we interpret it as debt pay down dollars return is the largest?
It depends on the loan. So if you actually got a small loan on this property, you had a relatively small loan, the size of that debt pay down area would be tiny. And so it really matters what you're doing on this. And you could do like a 15-year mortgage where that red area would be much larger. And so it depends on the property. And that's what I meant by it's unique to each property and the characteristics of the property you're analyzing specifically.
Yep. And then go back to the slide, probably that one. All the colors, all your property stuff. Okay. Why does the house with no loan still show an interest only section? I don't think it does.
This gray area?
Yeah, that's just the...
It's all the expenses, including interest on the property, if there is any. So give me a second. There's a slide coming up where I explain what's included in each area, and we'll get there. In fact, I think it was the slide that I was just about to go into.
Perfect. And then is the size of the far right and far left band just 10% of the space or some specific percentage after taking account of the bands and the black line?
Is that Andrew?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Andrew. So I made them dynamically sized. Yes. So we add in like, I think it's either 10% or 20% size buffer to make the chart meaningful by showing you that there is an area for this. But you're right, it goes unlimited to the up end and basically to 0 on the low end. And rather than go to 0 and have like all these things skewed to the right, I did decide to cut it off at 10% or 20% on both those edges. But everyone else can ignore what I just said. It's a side conversation for me and Andrew. So anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, cool. All right, so what's included here? And I will tell you, coming up, I was like second and third and quadruple guessing myself while I was coming up with like what to include in each one of these areas where it would be meaningful and I could use it in the way that I was thinking about it. And so I made this little table, and honestly, I changed the table quite a few times and said, okay, well, what if I do it this way? Does that work better? Does this work better? And so this is what I finally ended up on. And it's here for more of a kind of like history archival reason. If anyone wants to know like what is included in those areas when I do my calculations. So I'm not going to go into detail. I'll just show you that the like area at the very bottom doesn't include the principal pay down of the loan. It includes pretty much everything else, nor does it include professional property management because that's the one at the very top end. And then the other one, the next section, does include everything except for professional property management. When we finally get to the section where we're starting to talk about cash flow from depreciation, to calculate the high end of that, we don't have the cash flow from depreciation in. When we calculate the low end, we do. And then finally, at the very, very high end, the only thing we're leaving out is that cash flow from depreciation, but we are including property management. Okay, so that's those calculations and how they're actually done. Do you have a question, Brian?
No, but just to like re-answer Kimberly's question, why does the house with no loan still show an interest only section? This is the slide that really answers that. It's the gray section.
There's another slide on that too.
Oh, excellent. My job is to jump ahead for you.
You're doing a good job at that. Thank you very much for doing it.
I'm just asking the questions that people want answers to, James.
I appreciate
them the answers they want.
We will get them the answers. That's coming up. Okay. Okay. So remember before I told you there was this weird thing that happened with property management because we were discussing Andrew asking, how do you deal with the interest rate thing? So here's a weird case that comes up with property management. Where we primarily calculate the cash flow parameter is we actually we take the inputs you put in whenever you enter a property in the real estate financial planner, and it does the inputs you entered and does the calculations from that. So here's a tricky situation. If you came in and you said, James, I'm actually going to charge, I'm going to put 1% in my property management section here because I want to sort of reimburse myself for the expenses I have with property management. What the system will do, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to do it, and I'm telling you this up front, is it'll say to you, in order to find the dividing line between no property management and you having property management, it has to do two calculations. It has to do a calculation where you say property management equals 0, and then you have to use a calculation where we do property management equals whatever professional property management will be. If you put 0 in there, I assume it's 10% for your professional property management. So that's the default assumption if you never put a number in for property management in the field where you're doing your analysis. However, if you put something other than 10, like let's say your real professional property management rate is 8%, then it will use your 8% to do the calculation. So it'll do it correctly there. But if you do something a little bit unusual, and it's highly unusual for people to do this, but some people might, where they say, I'm going to put in 1% to kind of cover my costs of doing property management. It's sort of like the cost for me to do it myself. Then the system believes that that is what you are getting for professional property management, and it will use the 1% in that case. So just be aware if you're putting in an abnormally low number for property management because you're doing it yourself, the cash flow parameter is going to calculate slightly oddly for you. If you do 0, it works fine. If you put in like a reasonable number like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever you're getting, then it'll work fine. But if you do this like really low end number, then that's what happens there. Okay. So that's what this slide is all about. Okay. So where do you find the cash flow parameter? There are 3 places it exists right now. Number one, if you're looking at a list of properties in the real estate financial planner, it'll show you a little meter so that you can quickly see at a glance which one of your properties have what type of cash flow on them. I'll show you that here in a second. Whenever you edit a property, the cash flow parameter shows up at the very top of it. So you can see at a glance how the cash flow for that property is performing. And then finally, when you look at the rent chart for a specific property, you could toggle cash flow parameter on and off. So when you're here looking at the list of properties you have, you're in the real estate financial planner, you click on properties and it shows you the properties that are in your account. This is from when I taught that class where we had cash flow Brian and appreciation James, and we did cash flow versus appreciation. These are the 4 properties that we use for that particular class. And now that you know what you're looking at, you could look at this little tiny cash flow parameter and you could see what the cash flow looks like on any of the properties that we're analyzing. So for example, in the one where we had an appreciation rental, you could see that this one was basically break-even cash flow self-managed. Whereas the one from a cash flow rental was slightly positive cash flow if you were self-managing it. The other ones here, because these 2 are nomad properties, they were way negative. They weren't even positive if you took into account cash flow from depreciation. They're in the section that's red for debt paydown. So you could easily now see this is a negative cash flowing property. This is a significantly negative cash flowing property. This one's about break even if you're managing it yourself. And this one's slightly positive if you're managing it yourself. So it makes it super easy now to see which property you're about to go into and edit. And then when you go in and edit the property, this is what appears at the top, showing you the big cash flow parameter for that particular property. And then all the stuff for you to edit is below. That's the second place. Then the last place is this. And this is the craziness. So this shows you a chart over time of the cash flow power meter. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I would like to walk you through the graphical construction of how the cash flow power meter is created when we do it over time. You don't like my background stuff?
They're great.
Aren't they cool? I actually really like these. Okay. All right. So remember what I told you before. The cash flow power meter is primarily you plotting rent, right? It's a measure of rent. And so when you're in the page, the chart for rent on a single property, and you cannot see the cash flow power meter for more than one property at a time because they're different for every property. You can't do the same chart on top of each other because they're actually different sizes and stuff. Okay. So you can only have it on when you have one property on. But then this is what it looks like if we have all of the underlays. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a second, turned off. This just shows you rent over time. This is at the very beginning. You're getting about $2,000 a month in rent. Rent is increasing when each time you have a lease renewal. And then finally you get up to here where it's just over $6,000. If we adjust for inflation, I have a feeling this one's going to be pretty much $2,000 the whole time. Okay. So that's what rent just looks like. I took the rent thing off and now I'm showing you that underlayment. And this is the gray area that is no debt pay down. So to kind of answer Kim's question from before, this is the one that I was referring to. So this is the rent required to cover. The top of this line is where it's break even, but it's the rent required to cover your mortgage interest, not the principal, vacancy, maintenance, taxes, insurance, HOA, landlord utilities, any other expenses you have entered in on that spreadsheet or the deal analysis thing, private mortgage insurance, etc. Okay. Now it does give you a credit for cash flow from depreciation and any other income. So like if you're on Brian's spreadsheet or the real estate financial planner and you included other income because you're getting, whatever it is for renting a garage or, something else that's other income on the property.
Laundry,
it does
all that.
Yeah, laundry or something like that. It does offset for that. So it shows you the rent you need to have to be break even for that. So this gray area then shows you how much rent you would need just to cover those things, if you think about it that way. Okay. The next section shows you where you would need to be at the very top edge of it, where you need to be break even if you covered everything else we talked about, plus the amount of principal paid on the mortgage on that thing. Okay. And still, go ahead.
So just to back up one slide.
Yep.
So just to be clear, I'm fairly sure that this is correct, but you could actually then break this down one step further, which I actually think would be useful. And maybe you did it, right? To basically show, because some people may be like, well, what's the hump at, around 300 and whatever it is, 37 months or whatever, right? And then, so your depreciation is ending there. And then you're paying off your loan at month 360.
That's correct.
Right? That's your little hop. And so in the gray area below this, there's actually like fixed expenses, because one might look at that and go, well, whatever the low amount there where the loan is paid off in 360 months is like $900. And you might be like, well, there's no way I have $900 in other expenses. It's because all those other expenses have increased over time.
That's right.
And so it would be really interesting for you to actually add a subshade of gray to this that shows here's the mortgage and here's the other expenses inflating with time, so that it's not at all confusing.
Yeah. So this is like, where do you stop and start with these things,
no doubt.
right? Do you do maintenance by itself? Do you do vacancy by itself? And we have all these separately, right? So you can go and look at these, but like to put them all on one chart, I thought the power meter was complicated enough, but like summarize some of the key parts and group it together. But
I'm not saying to add it to the power meter. I'm just saying, like, when you present this information, like having it in this slide, because otherwise I can see someone easily saying, well, gosh, I have $900 of expenses on this property. That sucks, right? When really it's probably like 300 or 400, or I don't even know what the number is, right? To begin with, just inflating for 30 years.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so we got this part, which includes all these types of things on the property. This one includes, additionally, the amount of principal you're paying on the loan. Okay. So it does that in there. It still has the credit for cash flow from depreciation and other income. This section is the everything we talked about before, but now shows cash flow from depreciation kind of broken out, where if you didn't have that there, this is where it all shows up as additional. So this is this section where cash flow depreciation is this amount. Okay. So it shows you that this is the now thing where if you took out, if you didn't get a credit for the cash flow from depreciation, this is the extra amount for it. That's why it shows it there. Okay. Then right here is you're beyond now that cash flow from depreciation. Now we no longer get a credit for it. This is where you have true positive cash flow if you are managing it yourself. And then finally, this is the section where you have true positive cash flow even with professional management, and no cash flow from depreciation benefit in there at all. Okay, that's what that calculation is. Now, if we add the rent back on, you can now see this. So if we look back here early on in time, you can see that this property pretty much started off with just about break-even cash flow if you were managing it yourself. Okay. Then from here, it kind of grew until eventually got to this point where it became positive cash flow even with professional property management, and continued to increase over time. And you can see, just as Brian pointed out, this is where you pay off the loan, and this is where you lose depreciation, because you can only depreciate the property for 27 and a half years. And so after 27 and a half years, you lose the cash flow from depreciation. And right here, after 360 months, you actually lose the loan. You no longer are paying down the loan. So the amount you need in rent in order to have positive cash flow is a much lower bar. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
other people say, I agree about the changing of the color. Interest only wasn't obvious that it included all base costs of ownership. Someone else says, keep it gray. Don't add another shade, but add polka dots. And then another one says, just change the title to interest only plus base expenses. And finally, will this be incorporated into the spreadsheet also?
No, it will not. But it does get incorporated, first of all, because it's just not, it's not designed to do that. The spreadsheet is not designed to do this type of charting. It is designed to do your cash flow analysis, and then you'll do that. If you do the real estate financial planner, it's included in there in the spots I showed you. So I'm assuming it's not. Brian's in control of his spreadsheet, but I am not creating.
2 a.m. tonight, James gets an update to the spreadsheet.
You're welcome to do that, but I don't think you want to. It's not worth it.
I mean, you can go in the spreadsheet now and look at this, right? You could figure out where those things are. You plug everything in and you don't have management there. And if it's positive cash flow, you know, hey, okay, I can add professional management. Oh, it's not positive anymore. You know exactly where you are.
You do.
You're in the light green area.
Yeah.
Right?
But this is a great visual to see that.
No doubt.
Except you're not on your spreadsheet. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So like, how do we go from that little chart thing to the cash flow power meter? I'm just showing you visually how you get there. I showed you basically just 2 months. And now I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on its side, and I'm going to squish it so that you can only see a little sliver of it. And this is essentially the meter. And as Andrew pointed out before, I just cut off this other section here, and I cut off this section on top so that you can only now see a range of those values, and it plots it for you. Okay. So all we did in order to get to the regular charts is I now turned it to the side and I show it over time. So we're showing like little slivers over time here. So I got a couple examples to show you, and I just want to show you these so that you can become like more familiar with what they look like, and you can see some interesting things on here. So this is an example of 20% down payment in a normal market. This is basically showing you that it's slightly positive cash flow. You manage it yourself, and that over time it increases and goes and becomes positive where you have a professional property manager. Normal loan paying off after about 30 years. You didn't buy the property at zero. So it's a little bit longer than 360 months in here because you bought it later in the time. This is not the first property you bought, looks like. And so you can see the sections here for all that stuff. This is the one we've been looking at. There's nothing surprising here. This is if we take that same chart and now we adjust it for inflation. And to Brian's point earlier, this is where he was talking about those expenses that remain fixed and how they go up over time. If we adjust back for inflation, you can see that they are relatively fixed over time, that these expenses like taxes and insurance and stuff like that, when we adjust for inflation, we're assuming in this modeling that those are staying fixed with inflation. Essentially, they're keeping pace with inflation, and so that they look like a flat line when you do adjust for inflation later. Okay. And you could see this part here that you're getting from the loan. That shows you that over time, the amount you owe on the loan that the amount of interest you're paying on the loan is actually going down for two reasons. First of all, because you end up paying less interest on the amortizing loan, and secondly, because they're worth smaller dollars in the future. Okay, and so you can see that over time, and so you can see the rent is basically keeping pace with inflation, and the like line for you to kind of like have positive cash flow is going down. Your threshold in order for you to have positive cash flow when you buy rental properties tends to decrease because a lot of your expenses are fixed, like this loan portion. Cool.
Love it.
Okay. So variability. So now I'm going to add in some different variability. This is from that class that I taught from Peter's class, if you guys have been on the real estate story time. And in that class, we did a couple things. We made appreciation variable. So appreciation was no longer, 2% a year, 3% a year, whatever we were using. It is now some range of values that can go up and down over time by itself. It's independent. It's like a random variable with 2% being the average. Rent appreciation is also variable. It's 2 for average, but sometimes it could be -10, sometimes it could be +14, and anywhere in between those things based on a normal distribution curve. And then the things you're not able to see, which were variable as well, is mortgage interest rates and the stock market rates of return. But you won't be able to see those on this chart. But you can see rents going up and down. So now this black line here is rents. And you can see as leases renew, sometimes the lease, it gets renewed at a lower rent. Sometimes it goes up and you get an increase in rents. Sometimes it jumps up a lot. Sometimes it jumps down a little bit. Sometimes it's up and down. Sometimes it's all over the place. But over time, this tends to increase a little bit at a slope with inflation. Okay. And this is just to model some variability in here. But you'll notice, even with those other changes we saw, most of this other stuff is not impacted. The exception being because we tie taxes and insurance to how much the property costs, this gray line is a little bit of variability because those are the expenses in there, the taxes, insurance in there. But the red part of it is not affected by that. The yellow part of it is not, because that's fixed once you buy the property. And of course, your regular property management thing is just hovering on top of this. Okay, so that shows you the variability and you can see it. If we adjust for inflation, you could see the same idea we did before. This thing is sort of keeping pace with inflation over there. It's down a little bit from where it started, but you can kind of see it doing that. And then it kind of trends downward because of where the inflation adjusted amount of the numbers. Okay. All right. This is the slide where I want to show you the difference between what we've been doing before and now what you can see at a difference. So historically, when we wanted to see like, cash flow for a property or something like that, we might plot something like cash flow or true cash flow. And this is what it would look like. It would show you that you were nomading here and that you had negative cash flow while you lived in the property because we don't have any rent coming in and we were covering all the expenses. Then eventually we rented the property, we lived there, and then we saw cash flow kind of go up or down or whatever it was doing. And then eventually paid off the mortgage and we saw the cash flow increase from here. You probably haven't here the cash flow from depreciation going away. So there's a little bit of that, but then really this is the free and clear property and cash flow. There's some stuff you could see in here, but you can't quite see the same level of detail that you could here, where now you could see, hey, look, this thing was negative at this point, but it was really positive with cash flow from depreciation. And now this was positive if we managed it ourselves, but really it didn't get positive with professional management until here. So you could see a lot more detail with the cash flow parameter than we could before we're looking at just a true cash flow or a cash flow chart or even rent by itself. Does that make sense? That was like sort of like one of the big takeaways as to why it's worthwhile doing this and looking at it. Okay. All right. Here's another example. This one was from that cash flow versus appreciation class. Whoops. Okay. So this is a property where I'm showing that. Do you remember in that class, Brian, we talked about like, how does James catch up if he's in the appreciation market? And one of the things we came up with was James could do cash out refinances on properties, pull money out, live off of the money from the cash out refinances, and be able to hit financial independence early and retire. Well, what's interesting about when we do the cash flow parameter is we can see each refinance because it gets recalculated. So right here, I have a loan on a property, but right here, you'll see that my expenses on the property actually bump up. That's a cash out refinance. So you can see my expenses on it actually increase right here. Then over here, I held it for a little while longer. Then I had another cash out refinance, then another cash out refinance, then another, then another, then another. And then from here, I let the loan go. you'll notice something else interesting about this particular chart, and that is that the cash flow from depreciation ends really early compared to when the loan gets paid off. Normally, we only see like a 2.5 year period from when you had cash flow from depreciation and when your loan gets paid off. But in this case, your cash flow from depreciation is 27.5 years from when you buy the property, or when it's converted to a rental technically. And in this case, we've refinanced the property so many times that the loan is being paid off way after the cash flow from depreciation period ends. And so there's a much bigger space between when we lost our cash flow from depreciation benefit and when the loan gets paid off and we have cash flow. You'll also notice about this crazy thing is we're seeing break-even cash flow at the very beginning. And then once we start doing refinances, the first refinance, we have cash flow, we have positive cash flow, including cash flow from depreciation, only for a small period of time. And then when we do the next refinance, we've got negative cash flow unless we did an interest-only loan, and we have negative cash flow for the duration until this property is paid off, which is why when we looked at this cash flow versus appreciation class with cash flow Brian and appreciation James, we kept saying this gets worse and worse for James the longer he does this, because every time he refinances a property, it gets worse for him. He has more negative cash flow. And that was part of the problem. And now we can clearly see why that is, because now you can see where the rent is on the cash flow parameter and why we had negative cash flow. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, randomly, this actually points out another very minor flaw in the spreadsheet.
I know what the flaw is. I'm curious if it's the same one I think you think it is.
Yeah, so if you use the spreadsheet to analyze like a refinance or a property that you've owned for any period of time, the depreciation is always calculated at 27.5 years.
From the time you buy it.
From whenever you plug it into the spreadsheet. So like if I owned a property for 5 years and I'm like, hey, I wonder what it looks like when I refinance it, and I plug the refinance numbers in and I count that as year one in the spreadsheet, it will depreciate for 27.5 years.
Oh, you're saying your spreadsheet is wrong?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So mine does it right, except there is one small case where it does not do it right. And I'm not sure I want to go down this rabbit hole, but if there's any CPAs on the call, the CPA will know the error.
Well, what is it?
It's that when you nomad, you can't start depreciating the property. Your depreciation starts when you convert it to a rental.
Oh, sure.
So really, it could be a little bit longer than this, but it's a small dollar amount and it's 30 years in the future.
Yeah. So Kimberly says this is correct, isn't it? Yes. The way James is doing it is correct because his depreciation ends in 27.5 years. But if you use my spreadsheet to do a refinance analysis, it will not be correct. I've noted that. I'll probably correct that. And then another question is, well, I guess it's a comment. Also, the cash flow from depreciation varies with your tax rate.
It takes it into account when we create this chart. So in the real estate financial planner, we ask you for what your effective tax rate is for that scenario. And then we use the number you give us to do that. So
as does the spreadsheet.
Yeah, the spreadsheet uses your effective tax rate too. Yep. An effective tax rate is conservative. Technically, it's your highest tax bracket that you're saving that money on. So it's a conservative number for what the cash flow from depreciation is, because we're using the effective, which kind of combines all the different brackets into one. Whereas really you're giving up the highest tax bracket first.
Yeah, that one's still a hard one because it's if you're just over one high end of the tax bracket and you would save, $100 from that bracket and everything else is the next one lower, or you have multiple deductions, which one actually gets to take credit for the top one, right?
I totally agree.
That's why we use effective.
I think that's true. That's a fair way to say it.
Yeah. And then, wouldn't the cash out refinance, the extra interest payment would count against the next property for tax?
Wouldn't the cash out refinance, the extra interest payment would count against the next property for tax?
Yeah, that sentence doesn't make sense. I think maybe it's with a cash out refinance, the extra interest payment would count against the next. I don't know what the next. Oh, you're cashing out, you're buying another property in the future.
Oh,
if you cash out, refi a property, then the extra interest is an expense for what you buy with the money. Correct. That is how my CPA treats it.
Yeah. In this case, we're showing you what your cash flow would be on this property based on the rent you're getting. So we're not really sort of allocating it to another property. We're saying on this property, what does cash flow look like on this property now? That's what this is, because it's really a rent chart. That's really what it is. And we're just showing you for a given rent, where are you on this kind of like area? Like what part of this are you getting cash flow from? Okay.
Yep. And then Kimberly says, but that would show on a different analysis. I just want to be clear. So if you do this where James is doing it right now in the Real Estate Financial Planner, it is 100% correct about depreciation. If you do a refinance calculation in the spreadsheet that you can download, it will depreciate for 27 and a half years because that's what's a fixed number in the spreadsheet. So it will be slightly incorrect. If you've owned the property for 10 years, you can only depreciate it for another 17 and a half. So it's a very minor point. I'll fix it in a future revision of the spreadsheet.
I'm gonna say something about modeling things in spreadsheets, and in particular Brian's spreadsheet and this particular error. Unless you are really, really late in your depreciation schedule, if you're in the first 10 years of owning the property, my guess is that the sensitivity, the like reliability of estimating appreciation rates and rent appreciation rates and everything else, you're going to lose the error in that depreciation benefit in the variability you're going to see in rent appreciation and home price appreciation and even insurance and taxes and stuff like that, where it's not going to be significant at all. The later you get, the more that could matter. So like if you were at 27 years and you did your refi and you put it into the spreadsheet, yeah, those numbers are going to be wrong. You'll probably want to put an effective tax rate of close to 0 in and just kind of ignore that, in my opinion, in order to do those calculations, which would sort of like temporarily fix it in that particular case. But otherwise, I wouldn't worry about it.
Most people in most scenarios, you will not notice.
Totally agree. Okay, so here is, I think, another one. Yeah, this is another one where we actually do the cash out refi, which is right here where we increase our expenses. But then instead of doing this and having it go out for 360 months, we actually pay it off early. And so now the loan is gone, but we still get this depreciation benefit for 27 and a half years from when we bought the property. So this just shows you that now you can visually see where you are, even in these unusual situations where you're doing a refinance, or you're doing cash out or paying off loans early, or then financing again. It actually will do it correctly and show you exactly where you are in the cash flow parameter when you do these calculations. And so you can see very clearly now what just happened. There was a refinance, and it takes time for you to understand what's going on in charts, but I can clearly see, oh, wait, there's a pretty big increase in here. That's a refinance. And then right here, the loan goes away. So obviously you paid off the loan, but this depreciation continued because you got it for 27 and a half years. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and this is getting very close to the end, only got a couple slides left. I wanted to show you, like, if you happen to be in Northern Colorado and even Denver, I would say this is very similar numbers. What do they typically look like? What does the cash flow parameter look like when you do a deal? If you were to do a 5% down nomad property, and by the way, this is like general rules. Can you go find a Grand Slam, home run, bottom of the ninth, World Series, Game 7? Can you find a property where your cash flow is just like amazing and it doesn't look like this? Yeah. Can you find a lot of properties where it's not like this at all? It's like really, really bad. Yeah, of course. But this is sort of like, in order to find a decent deal in Northern Colorado, this is what it is. Look, it looks like. You're lucky if you can find a property where you are break even, including the cash flow from depreciation, self-managed in our marketplace. And part of that is because interest rates are at all-time lows, and you're getting really, really good interest rates, and you're borrowing the most money of all the other things we're kind of talking about, because the other ones you're putting 20% or 25% down. So what does that look like in a cash flow parameter? It looks like this, where you're right there on that edge, where you're just about break even if you take into account the cash flow from depreciation you're getting and you're self-managing the property when you convert it to a rental. So that's like what I would consider a good, you're super lucky, found a good nomad property that would do that. Now, if you decide to house hack and rent by bedrooms, it could be significantly better than that, but it tends not to improve for multifamily. So if you're saying, I'm going to do nomad, I'm going to buy a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, it doesn't get much better than this, even if you're doing duplex, triplex, or fourplex. And part of that is because our duplex, triplex, and fourplex pricing is pretty high for the rents you're getting on the properties. Okay. So that's what we typically see for 5% down nomad. 20% down non-owner occupant financing type of a property, you're buying investment property, you're lucky if you can get it where you can find a property where you're break even if you're self-managed. So if you put 20% down, you're going to have a higher interest rate than if you do owner occupant, put 5% down. It's going to be worse than if you do the 25% down, but you're also borrowing less money than if you put 5% down. And so we're lucky if we can have it be right here where we are break even if we were to manage it ourselves and buy a 20% down property in our market right now with the interest rates where they are. This can change next month. It can change a year from now, whatever it is. Okay. So the next one is if you put 25% down to buy a non-owner occupant property, you're lucky if you can get a property where you're break even fully managed. You're putting more down payment down, you're borrowing less, and you're getting a better interest rate than if you put 20% down. And so you tend to be up here where you're just over the line of your slightly positive cash flow, professionally managed on the cash flow power meter. Okay. Is that a good explanation of that, Brian?
Yep. I think that looks pretty good.
Yeah. Cause before people would ask, like if I'm going to buy a property, what does cash flow look like? And it really, this gives you a good visual representation of where you're likely to see that. With 5% down, you're like right here at the bottom of the yellow. If you've got 20% down, you're probably right here at the bottom of the green. And if you've got 25% down, you're probably right here at the bottom of the dark green. Okay. Were there any questions?
Somebody says those are really insightful slides. And then
Nice.
Voices says, if I don't get a better cash flow with multifamily, because you had mentioned this with Nomad, why buy multifamily over single family? And I think my personal opinion is if you can find the multifamily, right, you should buy it because you will get a larger loan, you'll get more units. And over time, I think that will be great. And you'll get 5% down, which you're never going to get again on multifamily. But if you can't find it,
3.5% down in the multi.
Yeah. But if you
Or
can't
0.
find it, then it's house to buy a single family house and just move forward with that. So it's one or the other. If I could choose to fill my loan spots with, $400,000 loans or $200,000 loans, I would choose $400,000 loans.
Yeah, and Brian is coming at it from a very particular perspective where he wants to have a very large portfolio of properties and doing this. If you say, listen, I only need $5,000 a month to replace my income and I'm going to buy properties, you can go ahead and do that really rough math and say, okay, if these were free and clear, using the about 1/3 of my rent coming in is going to be my expenses on it. If I'm getting $2,100 a month in rent on the property, it's going to be about $1,400 for each one I own. So I'm going to need, 3 properties plus a little bit more. So if I did 4 properties total and I just paid those off, I would eventually have enough where it's going to be enough for retirement. If you guys didn't follow that, I probably need to do a whole class on like financial planning and modeling this stuff. But that idea you can use to say how many properties I need. And then it doesn't matter about loan sizes and stuff because you're only going to do 4 or 5 properties, whatever it is. However, if you really do think you're going to do a lot of properties, what Brian said is 100% correct. And a lot of the more successful, larger investor clients that have bunch of properties, they do think about it this way. They think to themselves, I've got 10 Fannie Mae loan spots. I want to optimize those. I want to have big debts on those things. And so I want to buy bigger properties. I want to go buy a 4-plex. And if I can buy another 4-plex, I want to buy another one of those and get as many of those as you can, because eventually your tenants pay off that asset and you have a larger asset that you own. From a Nomad perspective, it's really hard to find duplexes, triplexes, 4-plexes. It's especially hard to find duplexes, triplexes, 4-plexes where the numbers are even close to working and that you would consider living in. And so in those cases, if one comes along while you're shopping, pull the trigger and buy it, but don't wait for a duplex, triplex, or 4-plex. Go buy the best deal you can find in a reasonable period of time for you to shop for the property. If you've got your down payment and you're ready to go, it hurts you more to wait than it does for you to try to find the best deal in the way in. Really, it's going to be time in the market that's going to be your biggest benefactor. So Go find a good single family home that works and do it. If you happen to find a duplex, triplex, or 4-plex where you can do it with an FHA 3.5% down and the numbers work, awesome. Better do it that way, but don't wait around for it. All right, that's my soapbox for tonight.
And so this is a little off topic, but it's a follow-up to that same question, right? If I cannot do FHA, does it still make sense to do Nomad with a duplex with a conventional loan at 15% or a single family home at 5%? And I think you have to run the numbers, but probably yes.
My gut tells me you'd be better off doing the 5% down single family home, especially since interest rates are low and the multifamily rates are going to be much higher. I'd rather see you buy a $400,000 single family home, 400,000 plus or minus single family home with 2.625 interest rates right now, lock that in and hold on to that property forever. So buy a property you're going to want to have in your portfolio forever and just buy it. Buy quality.
Yeah. And then Kimberly says, I'm surprised that 5% more changed the answer that much proportionally on the chart. Seems odd that 5% versus 20% versus 25% move the bar on the chart those distances. And what you need to remember is that that gray area is cut off. It goes from however much it is at all the way to zero. And that dark green area is also cut off and it goes to infinity. And so if you look at this, the red to the dark green, like in the beginning, we're talking about hundreds of dollars, not really large amounts. And this is why if you run analyses in the spreadsheet or on realestatefinancialplanner.com, you'll notice that once you kind of get above the break-even point, every extra dollar you make pretty much goes straight to the bottom line. It's like this, get to the tipping point and then you're doing really well. And so that's what you're seeing in that chart is you're at the tipping point and every dollar you're adding propels you forward, but it's only a small portion, which is why James just went back to this chart of the entire amount possible.
Yeah, so this whole gray area is sort of not shown. We're only showing like right to here, and then we're showing it move between right here to right here to right here with the different loan types and the borrowing of different amounts and different interest rates. Because it's not just borrow amount. You're not borrowing 5%, 20%, 25 and doing the calculations on that. It's borrowing 5% and now getting owner occupant financing versus 20% and getting a pretty ugly interest rate versus getting 25%, putting the most down, but now getting a much better interest rate for an investment property, but not nearly as good as you're getting with an owner occupant rate. Right. So it's sort of
changing.
Yeah, there's more than one thing changing, which, as I told you at the very beginning, these things are unique to each property. Yep. The type of financing, your interest rate, all those things matter and they change what the characteristics of these things are. You'll notice the like red area, because you're paying down more of the loan, the red area on the 5% down is bigger than the red area on a 20% down, which is actually smaller than the amount you're getting on the 25% down. And you have to understand that sometimes the amount you're paying down the loan, you would have thought maybe, hey, listen, I'm paying down more with the 20% down because I've got more to pay down, but the interest rate made up the bigger difference. So now you can see the relative sizes of these things. So there's a lot going on here.
No doubt. And then Cody asks, if you buy a smaller loan amount, can you pay it off completely later or sell it and free up that loan spot? Like if for debt to income management, you need to buy a condo with a very large down payment, can you later just finish paying off that condo and free up one of the 10 easy loan spots? Absolutely. However, what has changed since I started doing my loan stuff, and I've talked about this in other classes, when I started, it was the first 4 loans out of those 10, you had to put 20%, you could put 20% down for, but loans 5 through 10, it was 25% down, even on single family homes. So they could change that back at any time. Right now, that's not the case because they made a change. So if you think about it that way, yes, you can totally put a large down payment on and pay something off. It will free up one of your 10 spots. But in this case, for me, if it would have been, hey, my third loan was like that, and then I paid my third loan off later, but now I had more properties, and it was really, I just freed up my 7th spot, I'm still going to have to put more down. But right now, absolutely, there's no kind of penalty, if you will, for doing that.
And there are additional complications once you get over 10. You're sort of operating under that 10 loan limit radar. But once you get over 10, then your pieces get restricted in where they can move and how you can do things and whether or not you can do cash out refinances and things of that nature.
Or even refinances at all.
Or even refinance at all. And again, these rules change. So what we're saying now is sort of like a snapshot in time. And as Brian pointed out, 10 years ago, these were very different. And I can assure you that 10 years in the future, they're going to be different than they are today. Yes. So you can do all the planning you want to do, but sort of like avoiding stupid mistakes as best you can with an uncertain future. We're just trying to do the best we can with that. You don't always know. I'll give you an example, and I hope Brian doesn't mind that I'm going to reveal this information, but Brian has talked about in other classes before about how he was buying properties early on, and he ended up putting 2 properties under contract at the same time, and ended up hurting himself with the amount of down payment and stuff like that he had to do. Do you remember like the first, whatever it was, 3 and 4 or whatever it was?
Yeah, it was 4 and 5. And
Okay.
I put number 4 under contract, and that was a 20% down. And then I put number 5 under contract before 4 had closed. And then I called the bank, say, hey, I know I need to put 25% down there. Like, and I was already under contract. And he was like, nope, now you need 25% on both because your intent is to cross the 4 property line. And I was like, what? Like, you could have told me that before. So
yeah, and I didn't know that rule. I mean, I don't think I ever had anyone buying 4 and 5 at the same time before and under contract on 2 things at the same time. So I couldn't even warn him. I was like, I didn't know that rule existed. And so we found that out by Brian, and you wouldn't have known, couldn't have known.
I think, if you're thinking about paying off loans and loan spots, to me, one of the most important rules is when you get to your 10, before you buy something else or before you vastly cross, into 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, make sure that you are like buttoned up on any refinances or cash out refis you want to do. Because if you like buy to property 15 and then you're like, oh, the interest rates are really amazing, I want to do cash out refis or do refis at all, you will have to find a way to essentially get rid of 5 loans if you're at 15 to get down to 10 so that you can do those refis. And again, it's the end of 2020, and those rules change all the time too. Sometimes they have been, you can only cash out refi 4. Sometimes it's been 6 with Freddie Mac. So these are the things that you got to keep up to date on. And it becomes very difficult if you go way over that 10 property, 10 loan limit to come back down and do refis.
I'll add an additional wrinkle to what Brian said, and that is sometimes it's the interest rates that are dictating what you're doing and when. So it's not like you can say, I'm going to wait till I get to loan 7, and then I'm going to pause and step back and say, should I rearrange all my loans now? It's like, hey, we're in an all-time low interest rate environment. I don't care if I've got 2 or 4 or 7 or 11, and I've got to dance around and pay off a property in order to be able to do my refinances. Sometimes the market conditions, the interest rate market conditions, and the rates you're going to get on the refis, especially compared to what you already have on your properties, will dictate when you're doing this kind of like reorganization, refinance, portfolio optimization type stuff.
Yep. And so CC says, if I found a single family home with good cash flow and a multifamily with similar cash flow and could do either nomad or 25% down payment, and in the present market condition, which of these options do you think is better based on the power meter? And so I'm going to say that the power meter is amazing for looking at the property once you know all of the things that go into the property, your interest rate and all of that. But trying to like compare two that are different, you would need to know the exact details on both properties for it to show up correctly on the power meter. Yeah. So it's almost like saying, if you didn't have the power meter, which one of those is better? How would you find out? Well, you would do the analysis on both. So if you plug them both in, you could definitely look and compare them. But I think you'd also want to look at kind of real numbers, how much money are you putting up? Do you have that much money to put up, et cetera? So
yeah, I have a slightly
actually not with respect to the power meter.
Yeah. If you ignore the power meter, because putting all your numbers in and comparing the power meter, you're sort of like making a snapshot decision. I haven't thought about how I compare one power meter to another yet. I sort of look at them as, okay, is this cash flow decent enough? Would I make this investment? And I guess you could use them in some comparison way, but I wasn't thinking about that. But like from a purely, like portfolio optimization planning position, there's a lot of questions about, do you have the down payments you need in order to do the subsequent properties that you're doing? And if you do, I think there's 2 conflicting things in my mind. Number one is the extremely better interest rate you're going to get on a single family nomad property now with 5% down, and having that as an asset in your portfolio for a long period of time. The other one is being able to take a larger amount of debt, use up that loan space with 25% down, and getting a really good interest rate, but not quite as good as you'd get in an owner occupant thing.
But still amazing.
Yeah. And so I don't know which one I would think of with that.
I'm buying the bigger property.
I was going to say, I think if I had enough down payments for additional purchases, I probably would do a larger amount on a single loan spot as well. That's probably my guess.
Yep.
So
But there's a ton of parameters and other things
there are.
that you would have to ask in order to accurately answer that question, right?
And I think some of it's personal preference when it comes down
Right.
to it as well. Because I think I have a bias towards single family homes than multifamily, because I have some unusual beliefs about what I believe about those two and how they work, and vacancy and maintenance over time and a whole bunch of other related stuff like that, and like the flexibility of loans over time too, because I think you're going to see more strictness in 2 to 4 than you are going to see in single family homes, is my guess, and that's purely speculation. But I think there's a whole bunch that goes into this that's not purely a numbers decision. So yeah. All right, well, that's all I got, guys. That's the mini class, and I did try to keep it to a reasonable amount of time. And I hope you guys are as excited about the cash flow power meter as I am, because the more I look into it, I really like this as a visual aid of seeing how properties cash flow. Because there was a standard group of questions I'd always go through whenever I analyze deals, like, does that positive cash flow with professional property management? Yes or no? It doesn't? Okay, well, does it at least have positive cash flow if I'm managing it? Oh, it doesn't? Okay, well, does it at least have positive cash flow if I have cash flow from depreciation? No? Okay, that's kind of ugly, but now it's sort of like, how ugly is it? And how far into that red area does it go? And that's sort of like a visual now that we can quickly glance at this stuff and see. So I don't know. I kind of really like it.
So James, if I want to actually access this, how can I do that?
You just go to realestatefinancialplanner.com. You sign up for a free account. I don't know if this is a premium resource or not. You have to sign for a free account. I'm not sure if this is premium or not. I really don't know. I'd have to go check, because I think at one point it was. So I don't have to see how that goes, but
1.21 gigawatts.
Yes, that's right. That's right, Nick. Yep.
Barack says it's premium.
Yeah, Frank, I think part of it's premium, part of it's not. I think right now, if you go to the rent chart and you plot just a single thing, you can turn it on. But that may have been like my oversight of not locking it down. But yeah. All right, so that's all I got for you. If there's no other questions, you guys are very welcome. I'm pretty excited about it. I really do like this, and I was all excited when I built it this weekend. The over time chart was all brand new. Like, we literally do this. And I should say, now that we're coming to the end, I reserve the right to change some of my assumptions and how I do these calculations, because for a long time, I was going back and forth of, should that be in here? Should this be here? How do I plot that? What do I include here? And I tried to do what made sense to me, but it's possible using this for 6 months, I say, no, we're changing this. And so it's going to be tweaked a little bit. So realize that it's, I'll call it late beta since this weekend.
Nice. So if you use the deal analysis spreadsheet and put appreciation for 0, would that imitate the cash flow power meter?
It wouldn't give you the visual.
Right.
And I think that's what you're looking for, right? But this does. I mean, this literally shows you. No, it doesn't do what the cash flow power meter does. It does show you the same dollar amounts from the cash flow. The return on investment sort of quadrant. It shows you the dollar amounts, not the return number.
Yeah. The way to figure out where you're at in the spreadsheet is go plug all the numbers in and start with 10% for management. If you have negative cash flow, put 0% in for management. If you still have negative cash flow, you're in the yellow.
Well, not necessarily. You could be beyond yellow.
Yes, and then subtract out the cash flow from depreciation, and if you're still negative, you're in the red.
Right.
Or worse.
That's literally how we would do this in the past, right?
Right.
When we were looking at this, we'd say, okay, 10% property management. Ooh, it's still negative. Okay, what about if we manage it ourselves? Still negative. Okay, and then we'd go and do that. So
this is just run the deal analysis that you want to do and see where the cash flow is in the range. That's all this. That's, in a sense, that's the very simplified form of what this is doing.
Totally.
But it gives a great visual to it.
Yeah. It's all visual for me, right? Like, it's how can we do a tool that's going to allow people to see stuff at a glance and be smarter about it. So yeah, cool. Here's a question. What if you are a 150K plus AGI earner who has to defer their losses, IRS form 8582, from Schedule E? Can we really count the yellow piece as cash flow? Great question. I make too much in order to get the depreciation benefit myself. And so it gets deferred to later. So yes, I think you can think of it as you've got it discounted in some ways because you're not getting it today. And at some point in the future, maybe I will be able to collect that, provided my income drops enough. Maybe it won't, and maybe I won't be able to collect it. But I do think about it, and I do sort of think about it in a slightly less than what it is in today's dollars number, if that helps you at all. So, does that help?
You bet.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
what is the total pie sum of the 3 returns on the quadrant?
I'm reluctant to even do that calculation because of the way we calculate it. And here's what I mean by that. In some of those lines where that divide the sections, we include certain things that we don't in others. So for example, in one section, we include cash flow from depreciation, but in the regular cash flow section, we do not, nor do we include it in the professionally property managed one. It's this slide that we're talking about. What's included and what's not included, if I can find it.
Bingo.
Right here. You can see that there are times when it's not included. So you can't really sum these because I do individual break-even calculations to find out where the line should be for each. And that was sort of like the why I might change things, why I might not change things, and how I was kind of playing with it to do what made sense for me. So I think it makes sense. If somebody, especially Andrew or someone else who really thinks about these things pretty deeply, if you guys want to like reach out to me and tell me, James, you're all hosed, we should change it to be this, let me know and I'll definitely consider it. But I did go back and forth for a while building this. So cool. That's it. That's all I got. That was intended to be a pretty short class and we went a little over, but good questions. I do appreciate it.
Sweet.
Are you sticking around or are you going? Because I got stuff I could do. I could do either way.
Either way, whatever you want to do.
Okay, cool. Let's stop the recording. Brian, I'll make Brian host and he can turn everyone on and we'll have a little chat off camera. But thank you all for coming. I do appreciate it. And let me know if you have any questions or you want to see stuff, just drop me an email or whatever you want to do to get a hold of me. I prefer not phone calls ideally, but email's better for me. All right, thanks guys. What? Why are you laughing? I'm not a phone guy.
I know.
All right, I'll talk to y'all soon. We're sticking around. We're going to do class after class. Bye.